Morning, everyone. Greetings from humid Jakarta this time, and wishing all Indonesians a very happy Independence Day. It was the Indian Independence Day just a couple of days ago. 75 for India, 77 for Indonesia. And boy, what a place! That's all I have to say. It's not my first time here, but this year has been pretty interesting because I've happened to be in the country for special occasions, not once, it's already, the second time. When I was in Mongolia, it was the Festival of Nadam, which is like the biggest, festival in Mongolia. And now this time we're in Indonesia during so quite serendipitous, I think. So today's video is to kind of talk about, privacy. Well, data privacy more than anything else. The reason for that is because I've been traveling around Southeast Asia, and interestingly enough, people here are so active on social media that it's definitely something that is coming into play right now in terms of regulations and everything. But then, uh, as people get smarter, or they get used to mobile devices and the internet and everything, this is definitely one factor that's going to come into play. A lot of you may have heard of the GDPR in Europe. This is the Global Data Privacy Rights Act that's coming up, which restricts companies from using your information or selling your information to other third-party countries. Now, in Europe, the rules are really well laid out, really well defined, so much so to the point where, companies like Google, Apple, whoever, Facebook, or I should say Meta, have already had to, change the way of working over there. Now, the same trend is something that a lot of Southeast Asian countries, Asian countries, I should say, are also adopting now. And the more, and I started digging through, so now it used to look like, okay, Asia Pacific. But now, across the world, these kind of regulations are definitely coming into play. Brazil also has, these kind of rules. India has definitely had these kind of rules. So the whole idea is, number one, the data that you're collecting from customers cannot leave the country, even if it is a cloud-based system or whatever it is. All those cloud servers or systems have to be hosted within the country itself. That's point number one. Point number two, which we're starting to see in a lot of places, is encryption, in terms of, especially within the telco world, because there's a lot of information that flows across, and your mobile number is basically the key or the index, so to speak. It's almost like a social security number. It's almost like a PAN card number. Oh, wow. There we go. That's the Shangri-La in Jakarta, by the way. But sorry to digress. So it's almost become like your identity, right? And there's a lot of information that people can actually learn about you and your spending habits just by virtue of having your number. So one is how much you spend, your location, how often you top up, so on and so on. So there are multiple parameters. And interestingly enough, one is, from the telco side, where, they might have all these encryptions in place so that the number doesn't get exposed, which is a good thing. But then there's a second part to it, which is, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you go to a mall and you're trying to purchase something from any store, retail store, whatever it is, they always ask you for your number or email address or both. What do you think happens with that? These, even though by law, you're not supposed to share them and whatnot, if you look at the fine print in all these places, they always say that, we authorize you to utilize your number or email address for marketing purposes. Those marketing purposes also means they can actually, sell your data to other third-party companies who are willing to pay us, pretty penny for it. Because at the end of the day, when you're trying to sell, if you're trying to build a buyer persona, you need to have as much data about your target audience as much as possible. How much time do they spend on their phone? How much money do they usually have in their account? What type of transactions do they make? So everything is basically tracked. And these data privacy rights or acts that are coming up, that's something that is really going to put a dent in sales and all these marketing plans. Now, I recall there was an article that I read, when Apple decided to stop allowing third-party sites to track users using cookies. I think it was Facebook that said that one move alone was costing them about $10 billion a year. And that's just one company. So you can imagine the amount of money that's riding on this. The other point I'm trying to make is, back in the day, nobody really gave a second thought towards, sharing their number with people, right? It was like, hey man, I need your number. But I don't think people really realized exactly what that meant. Back in the day, it probably didn't mean much. You probably ended up getting a bunch of flyers at your door or whatever. But these days, I mean, the moment you give your numbers out, the next day you start getting, sales calls from insurance companies, credit card companies, whatever have you. And I mean, it's definitely become a nuisance. But in addition to that, I mean, it's literally become like your passport. Because now you have all your personal information in terms of, your blood group and other, really private data, which a lot of the government websites are now using to, track you and, keep track of you. That also, starts getting exposed because your mobile number is basically your key. So, but this, a lot of Google, Facebook, whoever it is, they're all trying to come with alternatives to the fact that, they can't track you anymore. Billions are being spent on it, especially because these companies, their basic revenue model is based on advertising. So, but one of the things that we're going to have to see is, how they actually come across this. One way is they ask you explicit permissions for websites to track you while you're using the app or the website, or if you want to allow them to track you professionally. This GDPR is here to stay and is only going to keep getting harder and harder. So be very careful with who you share your personal details with. Back in the day, personal details meant your number, your address and everything, but you can add your mobile number to that list too, because the world is changing and it's important that we also change with it. So that's it from today's video. Happy Independence Day, Indonesia. And here's just a quick look at Jakarta. So this is Central Jakarta, beautiful place to be. So take care everybody, see you in the next one.